Welcome to the Content Magazine podcast, Conversations with Silicon Valley's Creatives. I'm Daniel Garcia, the cultivator of Content Magazine, published by SV Creates. Today's host is David Valdispino, the Content Magazine director.
Awesome. Welcome to the Content Magazine podcast. I'm David Valdispino, and today we have the privilege of sitting with bassist, composer, arranger, and software engineer Noriyuki Ken Okada. How's it going?
Good, thanks.
Right on. Thanks for coming in today and giving us a chance to talk. Yeah, awesome. So I was doing a little bit of research on you, right? You're a jazz musician, obviously bassist, but you play other instruments as well. You have your group called the Ken Okada Group, and you have a show coming up with San Jose Jazz in November. So for folks that might not have any concept of jazz whatsoever, what does bassist, composer, and arranger mean in a jazz setting?
Wow, that's a big question. Yeah. I think they're slightly different roles, bassist, composer, arranger. But for me, being a bassist is the most natural kind of thing. So I'll probably start from there. Bass is, when you see a jazz, live show, you might notice bass is usually in the middle of the stage, as opposed to if it's a rock or pop music, drums is usually the center. So that always tells the sort of nature of the instrument. It holds things together, and it provides like the tonal center and also the rhythmic guidance to all musicians. So but usually bassist is not seen as a front person. So actually I love that role. So I don't have to be like the star of the show, but I know because of bass, because of me, the band is grooving, swinging, things are happening. So I love that feeling. And actually being a composer and arranger is a little bit like that in terms of I want the band to sound great. I don't have to be like credited as, Ken Okada wrote this beautiful melody. Maybe a little bit, but I want to leave a lot of things to the band who performs my song or arrangement. So, and for jazz music, it's a collaborative music. You want, or I want, the performers to like really shine and create really cool music on the spot. So I want to leave room for the performers when I write music. So.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for that intro there. There's like so many questions I want to go into, but I'm going to try to stick to my flow here. So that's a nice kind of primer for what you do as a musician. Moving back in some of the kind of research that I was doing, I was just looking at your upbringing, right? So like your bio, the first thing it says is that you're born in New York, raised in Brazil, and then spent time in Japan before moving to the U.S. So can you kind of tell us about your upbringing and growing up?
Yeah. So I was born in New York when my family was in New York because of my dad's business. And I don't remember too well because I was 2 when we moved back to Japan from New York. And then soon after that, we moved to Brazil because of the same business stuff of my dad's. But when we were in Brazil, I started, playing the piano because of my 2 big sisters. They were already learning piano, and I was just curious, hey, I want to play piano as well. But nothing serious, just for fun. But still, it gave me a pretty good foundation of, some basic, music reading and concepts of like keys and rhythms, those kind of things that helped me really go into, more music I loved when I was a teenager after going back to Japan. And around that time, I was into video games, just like every other kid. And I also enjoyed listening to like top 40 kind of American music, again, from my big sister's influence. So those things together, I got into, electronic music, programming using sequencers, like digital computer sequencers. And even, I also started playing drums and bass around that time. And I loved playing drums to like click track. So all of those things happened in my middle school and high school kind of years.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate to have like great friends who were, curious about all these different, genres of music. So we would form multiple bands and playing like whenever possible. So
what was that kind of musical influence like within your house? Like, were your parents musicians at all? What was their kind of take on you all playing music?
That's a great question. My parents were not musicians. My dad loved listening to classical and jazz music, though. So maybe that was a little bit of, beginning. But my biggest influence came from my big sisters, like many other things. But yeah, I don't even remember when was the first time I listened to, like top 40 or American or Western music. But as far as I can remember, I was like borrowing cassette tape from my sister and, play it on my Walkman.
And so a lot of that kind of period of your life you spent in Japan for the most part?
Yes.
And so what was kind of the music scene there? Obviously there's top 40 American stuff going on, and then, the video games and everything like that. But like what was kind of popular at that time amongst your friends? You said they listened to a lot of stuff.
Yeah, there were Japanese rock bands, pop groups as well. And those were probably the most dominant music that people would listen to. But many of those were influenced by Western music. And you could, even hear very similar arrangements or instrumentations or even grooves or like riffs sort of borrowed from like Western hit songs.
Yeah.
But I was not fully aware of those original versions. I would like listen to the Japanese version and just, enjoyed it. And later I found out, oh, this was actually a reference from, like Stevie Wonder or, I don't know, like Larry Graham or a lot of black music, actually.
Yeah.
Interestingly. So, yeah, that was like that. Even like pop idol group songs, because, those projects are usually done by like team of like composers and arrangers and, programmers. Those people were heavily influenced like jazz music or black music. You can see if you go to YouTube and search for like 70s, 80s Japanese music. Actually, you can hear a lot of influences from American music.
Totally. So, where did the kind of role of video games come in there? Can you kind of like paint that picture? Obviously, that's a big part of your life, technology and music. So, what was kind of the landscape of video games, and what kind of soundtracks were inspiring you there?
Right. I think it started from like the NES type of 8-bit, like 3-voice, very simple, digital sound. But that soon sort of evolved into richer tracks. Like when I was a teenager, that was when arcade games would go from simple beep sounds from like 3, polyphonic digital tones, and then into 6-voice, and then into like real sampled music. So I was able to like experience the evolution in real time. So and that overlaps with when fusion music became popular in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that was heavily influenced by Western, American fusion music, like Brecker Brothers or David Sanborn or like Yellow Jackets.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the Japanese fusion music and video games were like the first thing I was directly influenced from. And later I found like, oh, this was from Brecker Brothers kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, but going back to the game video music, I would say most of sound creators for those video game tracks were, again, influenced by Japanese fusion music.
Mm-hmm.
So naturally, as I kept listening to video game soundtracks, I heard from friends that actually the bassist and the drummer who are playing for this video game soundtrack are from this fusion group.
Awesome.
So you should check out this band. That's how I got introduced to Japanese fusion music.
Very cool. So just for, again, folks that might not be familiar, what kind of categorizes fusion music as opposed to like any other kind of genre of music, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like a form of jazz, isn't it? Or is it not necessarily jazz?
The American fusion is more jazz, I would say, compared to Japanese fusion. Japanese fusion has focus on like instrumental, like friendly melody, like technique heavy. It's like a showcase. It's almost like a circus of like superhuman techniques using some pop, easy to listen to melodies.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas American fusion is basically a fusion of jazz and rock. It has jazz at center, in my opinion, but using like new instruments, new grooves from like rock or other genres, but it's like always improvisation heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And harmony is usually more complicated compared to Japanese fusion.
Totally. Cool. Awesome. And so, you're having this experience with video games and like digging deeper and then finding more of the music at the core while being a musician yourself, right? Like you were playing throughout high school and such.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw that you went to university actually for music, or you played with a university band at some point. So how were both of those interests kind of playing out as you were coming into adulthood and kind of figuring out what you wanted to be when you grew up, right?
Right.
Forever question.
Yeah, I never really pictured, what would happen in adult, years, back then. I was just curious about jazz music because of, fusion music. We were writing songs and like submitting to like music competitions back then, but I found that I was not very good at improvising. Like friends would, like my band members would say, we'll give you a bass solo, do something. And I was like, run out of ideas very quickly. So I was like, okay, I think I got the basic techniques to like play fusion, but I don't know how to improvise. Maybe I should look into jazz. And, coincidentally, my friend's band, I went to a University of Tokyo, but my closest friend in my high school years went to Keio University, which had the big band with the longest history in Japanese college big band.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, we don't have a bass player, do you want to sub? And I was like, yeah, of course, why not? So that's how I got, into college big band. And back then, I almost like didn't know, anything about jazz. So it was pretty painful to even play some very basic blues. Blues is like a 12-bar form. One of the important forms in jazz and blues and rock. But just improvising those simple 4-beat walking bass line was painful at first. But after I kept playing, and after playing many times, I finally, started to build my own system of, okay, I could use this note to build the next movement kind of stuff. So that even expanded into like improvising solos and creating melodies. So beginning to, start playing jazz was a very important turning point.
Awesome. And at that point, you were going to University of Tokyo also. What were you studying for school at that point?
Great question. This is, actually, I majored in law.
Okay.
And so random. And back then, I was just, in high school, I was a pretty arrogant kid. And I was like, if I am to take an exam for university anyway, why not try the hardest school? And University of Tokyo Faculty of Law is pretty much the hardest school to get in Japan, at least 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, maybe I'll become a lawyer and I'll only take cases that I'm interested in, and rest of the time I'll play music. Very arrogant. That didn't work out because studying for the bar was really hard.
Yeah.
I failed 6 times.
Wow.
Miserably. And by that time, my girlfriend, who is my wife now, has already, graduated from school and started working for a big company surrounded by, those established, really cool adults, and I was like, nobody. I was still studying for the bar. But anyway, going back to your question, I was studying law.
Yeah, but playing music at the same time. So interesting, the parallel paths there at least. So moving forward, right? So you moved to the Bay Area in 2002.
Mm-hmm.
I pulled up your LinkedIn because that's just what we do these days.
Mm-hmm.
And then going through your list, right? Like there's CEO and VP and founder and manager of all of these things, right? The first one was like cell phone, music, ringtone technology, and that was your own company at that time.
Yep.
So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So it came out naturally, but not. We didn't plan out everything. Of course, that was the time when I gave up the bar exam.
Yeah.
And I was like, I got to do something. Otherwise, my girlfriend would leave me, desert me. So I just started taking programming, gigs, because I happened to have done programming, in my childhood. It was fun. And my, friends were like, hey, I know you were, you have done some programming. You want to learn some more? Do you want to do some serious stuff and, take some real programming jobs? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I had this friend who would become a co-founder later for our first company. He would teach me via emails about some C programming basics. So that's how we started, but we gradually took more programming gigs, and finally we were like, oh, this is cool. We are making more money than, our classmates. So we should create a company. We could be rich, which was, naive, of course. But yeah, it took a couple of years for us to, really become stable as a company. But soon we found like this is just like any other software company that we're doing. This may get boring pretty quick. So that's why, because that friend was also a musician, we were like, we should do something around music AI. And that's how we came up with the idea of, machine-generated music or machine-generated arrangement, where the users would be able to create their own version of a song, which became a ringtone service.
Wow.
So, yeah, I was I still had that arrogant personality back then, that I had in high school and college, and I was like, I would be the CEO of this company. But many of the heavy lifting was done by the team, of course.
Yeah.
So it was really cool team effort. And we commercialized the technology into mobile apps in multiple countries. So it was really cool.
Interesting. Yeah, but still with that baseline of music, and then kind of conjuring back some of that early video game influence and inspiration. What was that period like? I mean, one thing that I always kind of hear, right, is like the difference in creativity between like business and art, or art and science. But you're kind of straddling that line, and in some ways jazz can straddle that line also, because it's very technical and takes a lot of experience and understanding. But what's kind of your approach to creativity in both of those spheres, or how do they influence one another, if that makes sense?
Yeah. That's a great question, because in Japan, typically, as you grow up, you're sort of forced to choose one of like art versus science. And by art, I mean like, law and econs type of, stuff versus pure science. But to me, I was interested in both. And both of my two big sisters, were artists. So, I would learn like drawing, painting from them as a child. So to me, and also programming was my hobby as a child. So everything was sort of naturally together. So it does definitely influence each other. When I'm creating something, creating music, I have like several different approaches and tools, systems, but a few of them are definitely like systematic, like starting from like the key signature or the tempo and some basic motifs that would become a melody at some point, but I would start from those like pieces and then connect them using either like artistic inspirations or systematic like calculations. This should work together with this chords. And then after hearing that inspires me, and I hear where that music is going. And then I would capture that. And that's like the cycle of those processes. So, it's just mixed together in myself. So it may not be a, clear description of the process, but it's like mixed together, and I go from here to there, different angles, and then that itself inspires myself to jump to some other place.
Yeah. So touching on composition there also, with something like jazz, where there's not necessarily lyrics, there can be instrumental jazz. A lot of your compositions are instrumental from what I've seen. What do you feel like you're trying to convey, or what do you feel like you're trying to get the audience to take away, or the listener to take away from music that may not have like a message that just beats them over the head, right? Like,
right.
What's kind of that influence or inspiration when you're writing songs?
I think a few things. One is I try to like find a new melody, and I shouldn't say, that didn't exist before. That's a little too arrogant. So I just try to find a cool melody line that sort of derived from, what I've experienced, what I've heard, what I've played, and present that to the audience. And if the audience thinks that's cool, that's great. And other things would be experimenting ideas about if the drums groove is like this, how can I play the bass line? This bass line could be predictable. How about this? This might be too aggressive. So finding the right balance of, oh, that's cool, that's new, but it's not like over the top, like aggressive or experimental. The balance is very important to me. And also try to find a melody that sort of derived from my bass playing, which I think would be, unique, as opposed to melody that comes from like a horn player. So I try to find some meaning, how that music came about, and that could be like a few different, paths, but that's what I'm trying.
Yeah. And so how does that all work with the group, right? Like you said, you wanted to give room to, some of the lead instruments, the guitars and the horns and that kind of thing, to improvise and experiment. So how does that work when you're composing? And then also, how is your group composed? Like, I imagine y'all play together quite a bit, but also jazz musicians can just kind of sit in. So how does that kind of work with the group?
I think it depends a little bit on if I know beforehand that who's going to play this chart. But most of the cases, I try to make my chart like, this is a musician term, but a real book tune. Real book is it's a songbook for jazz musicians. It has melodies and the chords to that melody, and that's it. There's no, not too much explanation about, how you should play it, but it's like the core essential, information of songs. And my ultimate dream is to have my tunes in those real books, but I want to keep the chart minimal, so the player can actually use their own, voice to play the melody or the chords, and it's really amazing. Like every time is different. So that's one typical, way I write music and see it. But when I know already, like who's playing the drums, I would use a little bit of that information and, use that as a source of inspiration. Maybe I want to feature the drums fills in these in-between moments of these hits. So that's fun too.
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect transition, right? Because you have been, and then in November you're going to be playing Ken Okada group featuring Yoyaka Soma, who's a Japanese drummer who's living in America currently, but gained a lot of stardom and fame from this little app called YouTube, right? Back in 2017. So, she's been featured on Ellen and on all over the internet. I read articles on NPR and KQED, but basically got her start covering Led Zeppelin,
right?
Which isn't really jazz. And then, getting reaction videos from all of these legendary drummers, Deep Purple and Red Hot Chili Peppers and
right.
all of these things, right? So, and she's a drummer.
Mm-hmm.
So y'all obviously met because she's playing with you.
Mm-hmm.
So when did you first hear about Yo-Yo-Ka, and how did you meet, or how did that even happen?
Right. I saw her YouTube videos probably a few years ago, and that was just shared on social media. And of course, I was, surprised. Wow, this drummer is really good. And she was like 10 years old back then. Yeah. Or maybe the video I saw was the original, 8-year-old version, of her playing Led Zeppelin.
Mm-hmm.
But late December, last December, a friend of mine asked me to meet with her, and I didn't even know that she had moved to the U.S. And after hearing the story, it looked like because of the pandemic, Yo-Yo-Ka had to cancel a lot of shows. But she was right on the rise back then, right? So it was really frustrating for her and her family. So they decided to actually move out from Japan, so they would have like direct opportunities in the U.S. and just outside Japan in general. So this friend of mine was like, "Hey, have you heard about Yo-Yo-Ka?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think so. I've seen her videos. Like she's in America. Did you know?" And I was like, "What?" So that was 3 months after Yo-Yo-Ka had moved to the U.S., and they were still exploring, trying to expand their network so they would have more opportunities to perform or just make music in general. And when, on the way, to their place, back then they were in Oakland, and I was driving and I was thinking, okay, this girl has already performed with all these world-class artists, and what can I provide? Like the few things I could think of was she seems to be rock focused, and maybe I can provide some jazz experience, and maybe she has done a lot of cover videos on YouTube, but maybe she hasn't done too much of like working in the studio with other musicians type of thing, or live performances in general. So I maybe I would provide those, and then we meet finally, and they offered to do a quick jam session at her studio, which turned out to be great. At first, I was playing some like rock or fusion like riffs just to sort of trying to adapt to her style, but quickly I realized, okay, this is something that other world-class musicians can easily do. So I was like, let's just switch gears. I'm gonna bring out my upright bass, and I started playing upright, and I turned off my bass amp because I wanted Yo-Yo-Ka to hear, and I started from like subtle sound, and gradually build. We were like communicating, we were looking at each other, and that was an amazing moment, and I was able to see Yo-Yo-Ka was able to do that, and she is not just a rock drummer trying to post as many cover videos as possible. Not at all. YouTube is just one part of her music activities. I could easily hear she had already absorbed a lot from hearing a lot of different types of music. So I was like, this is great. We should do something, concrete. I want to do a project with you.
Yeah.
So that's why I booked a studio immediately.
Yeah. So what was that kind of unlocking process, right, of that jazz moment when you're bringing out the stand-up, right? Because, I read in one of her interviews, right, like one of the things they say is her ability to communicate through music, especially as somebody that, came to the U.S. from Japan and may not have spoken English as well as, native speakers. But music was always kind of that way of communicating. So what was kind of that interplay like? Was that just something that was like waiting to come out of that drummer, or was that like, does that make sense?
Yeah. At the beginning, it was still kind of rigid, and I didn't know how, a good way to sort of draw her out from her comfort zone. Turns out there was no comfort zone for her. She's pretty free, but she was just, being shy a little bit because that was our first time meeting, of course. But I was like trying to hint, like, hey, this is a piece of my idea. Do you want to do something about it or just leave it? And at the beginning was like hesitant moments, but gradually, and I tried the opposite. I sort of waited for her to play something, and then I would like respond to that. That's probably, one of the key moments that unlocked her, like understanding, okay, we are actually communicating. In that jam session in particular, I'm pretty sure she would be able to do it anyway. Yeah. But that's how it evolved.
It forms kind of like a dialogue almost, right? Like it's kind of give and take by each of the musicians, kind of showing what they have and then building on those. So
right. And in that session, it was even better that it was just two of us without like a chord instrument. It could work either way, but because there are no guitars or pianos, I was able to like freely play whatever I felt like, and that same goes to Yoyoka. So we were like freely playing together.
Yeah. Do you feel like both of your backgrounds as musicians from Japan that are living in America, did you have any kind of bond over that kind of connection? And what was that like? What were some things that you guys were kind of, I know that,
Right. That could be, more me thinking that way, but because I had some struggles after moving from Japan to the U.S. like 21 years ago, I felt like I should provide whatever I learned to her so that she can ramp up quickly. She doesn't have to go through the same struggle I had. But of course, she already has many friends who would help in that way. But I just felt, it's a sort of obligation as this is a Japanese word, senpai. Senpai means someone who is senior to you. And Japanese culture is very heavy on like age-based ranks. So if you're older than someone, you're sort of expected to like have more wisdom, and the younger person is sort of supposed to like follow the more senior person's advice, directions. It could work in a not so ideal way, but overall it works well. And for me, I felt like I should give whatever I learned. And by doing so, I'm pretty sure this is how many other people feel when you meet someone really talented. You want to, contribute to the person's success. So you feel, your life was worthwhile. A little bit. My life was, it was meaningful because of this person's success. A little bit of that as well.
Awesome. Yeah. So we'll go back to Yo-Yo-Ka also. But just speaking on, other folks that you've played with in the past, you've done jazz festivals around California, around the country, different jazz clubs all over the place. Who are some folks that you've played with, and what are some things that you've kind of taken away from those experiences?
John Worley, trumpeter, San Jose based. He was the first musician who hired me after I moved from Japan. And since then, I've played countless stages with him. So I'm super, super grateful that he did. And I think he taught me just, he doesn't really gives direct advice. He's just there, and he just plays his music. But I just learned from, seeing his back from on the stage, how he treats other musicians, how he treats the venue staff, how he treats, everybody. So that was a lot of learning. Although the very first gig that he hired me, he gave me an initiation. We were like, what's the first tune? And he goes, let's play this tune by Stanley Clarke. And this tune starts from a open bass solo. So Ken, go and play. And he hadn't even, heard me play anything. So that was a pretty big bet. So he took the risk. And I think he was just making fun, but it was like teaching me, be there on the stage, play to the audience, and, play whatever I wanted to.
Yeah.
So that itself was a great lesson already. So, John Worley. And the other person I want to mention would be Akira Tana. He's a Japanese-American drummer, legendary. He spent probably 20 plus years in New York, and he's originally from San Jose, and he's back in California these days. And after the great earthquake in Japan in 2011, he formed a band called Otonowa, which means sound circle in English, as a sort of, aid to the people in the affected areas. So we would play Japanese folk music in American jazz format. And that experience gave me a lot of so many things. Akira was in the band as of course, but the other members, Masaru Koga on tenor saxophone, shakuhachi, and Art Hirohara on piano, they both live in New York, but we would, fly to Japan together and play in the affected areas from the earthquake and tsunami. And we did that tour 7 times, and we were going back again in January. But playing in that group, I learned a lot. I think the most important part was you can lean on other musicians. And before that, I was like, as a bass player, I should provide solid rhythm, solid tonal center, and other musicians can build on top of me. That is still, true in many scenarios, but in Otonowa, everybody listened to each other, and even the groove becomes elastic. It's not like the same tempo throughout the tune. The tempo changes, the energy level changes. Everybody is like, transforming as the music, grows.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really invaluable, things I learned.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I noticed, I looked up kind of those tours as well, and there was the component in Japan, but then you also did some touring benefits in the U.S., right? Or in
Yes.
California as well. Mm-hmm. And there were some shows around as well, but I noticed San Jose Jazz was kind of part of that also.
Yes.
So what was that like, and are you planning on bringing that back? Is that an ongoing project moving forward?
You mean coming back to the festival?
Yes, or the festival in general. That's going to be something that's going on again with Okinawa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. In fact, we played in Monterey last September together with other concerts and festivals around the Bay.
Mm-hmm.
And this year, we've done one show in LA for the first time. So we are still actively playing in the U.S. as well, and we'll be playing again in Healdsburg in December.
Oh, awesome.
So, yeah, more to come.
Very cool. So, you ended up in the Bay Area, right? And then you mentioned some of these other musicians that you've played with that have roots in San Jose also. What are kind of your interpretations of the San Jose music scene, San Jose jazz scene? And was that like a pleasant surprise, or was that a reason that you were drawn here? Or, yeah.
San Jose, I just love the scene because it's diverse, of course, including, I think, coming from my background, San Jose has one of the very few Japantowns left in the U.S. And I kind of see sort of meaningfulness to be in that community. But even outside of that, just we may not be like New York or Tokyo, but it's just the right size for me, the jazz scene. Everybody knows everybody kind of feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever you go to a new gig with new members, there's a very high chance that you've already played with at least one of those. So that way, naturally, you can expand your network as a musician in the San Jose scene. And there's also San Francisco and Oakland. So together, the Bay Area jazz scene is really, exciting and happening. And San Jose, for me, of course, I've been in San Jose for a long time. And I'm still trying to find the connection of San Jose as like the tech, epicenter, and also San Jose as a art scene. But to me, maybe the closest thing to that would be me trying to, create music using my, also using technical background, sometimes even, using like machine generated, or AI tools. Not always, but it's actually fun to, borrow some ideas from AI. But yeah, that's how I see the scene.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because there's so much, fear about AI in certain art circles and the art industry, right? But using it, I mean, I guess what do you think that illustrates, being able to just like use it in a way that's benefiting your art rather than taking away from it?
As far as music goes, I'm not too fearful because music, and likely in other areas too, there are like infinite possibilities to create a music, create a melody, or add chords, add arrangements. So, and I've thought this through because I've done, couple of companies focusing on machine generated music. At one point I was like, this is easy. I can just convert my thought process of creating music into logic algorithms, and then I should be able to let the software compose my music. And I think that still stands true today, but that would be just my way of writing. And because of deep learning these days, AI-generated music has evolved even more than that. It's not just a implementation of the creator's music process. It can actually take many, many, many data and generate something believable.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no context, there's no personality, and there's no attitude, intention. Those things are as important, sometimes more important than the melody itself. Why that tune exists, like who is playing it, why did the composer compose it, those things actually are very important, and AI cannot do that. So of course you can still, I believe many of the top hits today already use a lot of AI generated ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And that's cool. That gives you more possibilities to music that no humans have discovered.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a sort of detection tool of where the ores are in the mine, and if you find one using that tool, just go for it. That gives more depth to the music that we created. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, one final question here. In your bio, at the end of it, it says that you're on a continual pursuit of excellence in music, artistry, and technology. What is that journey like? And I assume it's one of those journeys where it's not necessarily about the destination, but it is about that process of getting there.
Yeah. It's it's continuous effort, and it's tricky because as an artist, musician, and software engineer, I do want to get to the paramount someday, but maybe it's a never-ending journey anyway, and I get distracted by other interesting things. Maybe at one moment I'm trying to get to the higher place on the musical side, but all of a sudden I find some group of people in some distance working for like self-driving cars. And I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. I'm curious. And then I go off track and go to that group of people and talk to them and learn from them about how self-driving cars work. And at that moment, I'm not necessarily thinking about how I would apply this back to music. That may or may not happen, but I'm just going with the flow. Whatever I find interesting. English is so hard. I just go there, and I end up at the same level than a while ago, but I don't mind because I know something new now. And look at the summit again, and oh, okay, yeah, I almost forgot. Let's climb this mountain a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's and then repeat.
Awesome. Well, Ken, it's been so great talking to you. Is there anything else that you want the people to know? Is there anything that you wish that I had asked you that we can close on? Or
perhaps just I might want to mention my dad, who passed away recently. Almost everything I do is like because of him and influenced by him. Of course, me born in New York was because of his job, and my love to Brazilian music again is go back to the years of when we were in Brazil, and my curiosity in many things, especially in languages. He loved learning languages. Even when he was retired, he was like 68 years old back then. He was on the program of like multiple months programs in Paris, in Florence, for like French studies and the Italians. And that's when I actually visited Europe for the first time and met up with my dad. And he also studied and spoke Spanish or Mandarin, even Russian. So I'm just trying to for me live up to what he left in me and live up to his legacy. Thanks, Dad.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great. And just his approach to language and your approach to language, and how they both are kind of moving in that direction towards universal understanding of kind of what makes people tick, and moving towards that excellence that you were talking about, right? So, But yeah, that's great. Well, thanks for talking to us. You are playing at the San Jose Jazz Break Room, which is right behind us, on November 10th, which is a Friday.
Yes.
And it is Ken Okada Group featuring Yoyoka Soma. Doors are at 8 o'clock, I think. Tickets are $25. But it's been so great to have you, and I can't wait to hear you play, and hope to encourage everybody else to come out and listen as well.
Thank you so much, David.
Right on.
Thank you for listening to the Content Magazine podcast. Follow us on social media at Content Mag. Become a member and help us to continue to tell the stories of the South Bay creatives. This episode's music is Traces by the Ken Okada Group from their 2023 album, Square One.